Episode 1. Why James Adair's 23 Parallels Between Israelites and Native Americans. James Adair was a British trader who spent 40 years living among southeastern Native American tribes. In his 1775 book, The History of the American Indians, he advanced a bold and now discredited theory that Native Americans were the literal descendants of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. To support this, Adair laid out 23 supposed parallels between Native American and Israelite customs, including tribal government and clan structures, ritual purification practices, the concept of cities of refuge, rules surrounding marriage and divorce, observance of feasts and fasts, speculative linguistic similarities. One of the more intriguing, if often overlooked, aspects of Adair's account is his reference to buried metal plates, 5 copper plates, 2 brass plates. According to Adair, these plates were kept by native tribes for sacred or ceremonial purposes. While he made no connection to Nephites or Lamanites, terms that wouldn't exist for another half-century, his descriptions of metal records later echoed conspicuously in Mormon narratives. Notably, metal record-keeping traditions, the sacred use of brass or copper plates, the framing of native peoples as Hebrew descendants. There's no direct evidence that Joseph Smith ever read Adair's book. However, many of the themes it explores, Hebrew origins of Native Americans, lost tribes mythology, and ancient records buried in the earth, were part of the popular religious and speculative landscape of early 19th century America. Adair's work likely helped shape that atmosphere, alongside other texts like Ethan Smith's View of the Hebrews, 1823, which drew from the same well of pseudo-historical speculation and is often cited as a more immediate possible influence on the Book of Mormon. Source: Adair James, The History of the American Indians, London, Edward and Charles Dilly, 1775. Let's break down the 23 so-called parallels Adair claimed proved Native Americans were Israelites, and see just how thin the evidence really is. 23 supposed parallels between Israelites and Native Americans. 1. Tribal organization. Native Americans were divided into clans and tribes, a clear structural similarity to the 12 tribes of Israel, emphasizing kinship and lineage. 2. Government by chiefs and elders. Leadership came from chiefs supported by councils of elders, reflecting the Israelite system where tribal elders held judicial and governing power. 3. Cities of refuge. Certain sacred places served as sanctuaries where accused individuals could avoid immediate punishment, mirroring biblical cities of refuge meant to protect from revenge killings. 4. Marital customs. Marriage and divorce were not casual matters. They required approval by elders or tribal councils, similar to Hebrew laws that regulated family and social order. 5. Purification rituals. Ritual washing after events like childbirth or death was common, reflecting Mosaic laws about cleanliness and the separation of the pure from the impure. 6. Levirate marriage. Widows sometimes married their deceased husband's brother or a close relative, preserving family lineage, directly paralleling Deuteronomic law. 7. Mourning customs. Mourning involved formalized rituals and fixed periods of time, echoing Hebrew traditions that honored the dead and prescribed how grief should be expressed. 8. Anointing and blessing. Oil or animal grease was applied during ceremonies, a practice closely resembling the anointing of priests and kings in Israelite religion. 9. Feasts and festivals. Seasonal communal feasts were held, often tied to agricultural cycles, much like Jewish religious festivals that marked sacred times. 10. Sacrifices and burnt offerings. Some tribes practiced animal sacrifice, including burnt offerings conducted in religious ceremonies similar to Old Testament worship. 11. Ceremonial cleanliness. Strict distinctions between clean and unclean influenced diet and contact with the dead, reflecting a system akin to Levitical purity laws. 12. Ark-like sacred objects. Tribes carried sacred objects wrapped carefully in skins or cloth, evoking the Ark of the Covenant's role as a physical symbol of God's presence. 13. Priesthood system. Religious leaders performed rituals and guided worship, serving a role similar to priests or Levites in Israel. 14. Sanctity of the name of God. The name of God was treated as sacred and ineffable, not spoken lightly, paralleling Jewish reverence for the divine name. 15. Language. Adair claimed linguistic parallels between Native American languages and Hebrew, though modern scholarship dismisses these as coincidental or flawed. 16. Oral tradition of a flood. Tribes held stories of a great flood, a narrative strikingly similar to the biblical account of Noah's flood. 17. Belief in a great spirit. A monotheistic belief in a supreme great spirit paralleled the Israelite worship of Yahweh as the one true God. 18. Temple or sacred places. Mounds or temples were built for worship, creating designated holy spaces similar to Israelite tabernacles or temples. 19. Shofar-like instruments. Horns or trumpets were used during rituals or in war, functioning much like the shofar in Jewish tradition to call the people or signal events. 20. Fasting and prayer. Periodic fasting and prayers were observed during times of crisis or thanksgiving, mirroring Israelite religious observances. 21. Wandering in the wilderness. The nomadic lifestyle of some tribes was compared to the Israelites' 40 years wandering the desert before entering the Promised Land. 22. Customs of war. War was conducted with sacred rituals, purification afterward, and taboos about participation, closely reflecting Israelite wartime religious practices. 23. Sense of chosen people. Many tribes believed they were specially chosen by a divine power, destined for a unique role or destiny, mirroring the Israelite self-identity. At least 6 prominent voices, in addition to Adair, helped spread this idea. Thomas Thorogood, 1650, an English Puritan clergyman. Thorogood published Jews in America, one of the earliest works to argue that Native Americans were remnants of the 10 lost tribes. His work was based on both theological assumptions and reports from early colonists. Manasseh ben Israel, 1650, a Portuguese Jewish rabbi and scholar, Manasseh supported Thorogood's theory, believing that finding the lost tribes could herald the Messianic age. He even petitioned Oliver Cromwell to allow Jews to return to England, citing the presence of the tribes in America as a prophetic sign. Elias Boudinot, 1816, a Revolutionary War patriot and former president of the Continental Congress, Boudinot published A Star in the West, arguing that Native Americans bore the marks of Israelite ancestry. His work heavily echoed Adair's parallels. Stephen Sewall, late 1700s, a Harvard professor who claimed that similarities between Native American languages and Hebrew offered compelling linguistic evidence for a shared ancestry. Ethan Smith, 1823. In view of the Hebrews, Smith compiled historical and cultural parallels between Native Americans and Israelites, arguing that they were the lost tribes. His book was widely circulated in New England and often cited as a possible influence on Joseph Smith's development of the Book of Mormon. Edward King, Lord Kingsborough, 1830s, an Irish nobleman who spent a fortune publishing antiquities of Mexico, a lavishly illustrated collection of Mesoamerican codices and artifacts. Kingsborough was obsessed with proving that pre-Columbian peoples were Israelites and believed the Book of Mormon confirmed his theory. James Adair was far from alone in promoting the idea that Native Americans descended from the lost 10 tribes of Israel. In fact, this theory was one of the most popular forms of speculative theology and pseudo-history in the colonial and early American period. For many Christian thinkers, especially Protestants steeped in biblical literalism, the mystery of the lost tribes provided a convenient framework for explaining the origins of indigenous peoples in the New World. This theory wasn't just a quirky religious speculation. It served a political and theological purpose. By framing Native Americans as fallen Israelites, early Christian colonizers could justify both missionary efforts and territorial expansion. If indigenous peoples were seen as long-lost covenant children of God, then redeeming them through Christianity became a divine mandate. And if they were Israelites who had lost their way, it also helped rationalize their displacement as a tragic but prophetic consequence of their rebellion. Modern DNA research has conclusively shown that Native Americans originated from Siberian and Mongolian populations, migrating to the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge roughly 25,000 years ago. There is no genetic evidence linking them to ancient Israelites. None. This hard science forced the LDS Church to quietly revise the introduction to the Book of Mormon in the early 2000s, walking back its claim that Native Americans were the principal ancestors of the Lamanites. This cultural myth gave religious cover to colonization, while also feeding the growing American fascination with ancient origins, buried records, and the belief that the American continent had a sacred destiny. So what do you think? Do these parallels actually hold water? Or are they just 18th century reach? Drop your take in the comments. I hope you learned something new. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and follow for more no-fluff, ex-Mormon content that cuts through the faith-promoting fog. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.